Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have affordable ACT, CLT, and SAT courses that include everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, tons of review questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built in study planner, and full length practice exams. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, be sure to use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Casey Vaughan with Northeastern. I'd love if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for having me. Casey here. I've spent 4 years in the Air Force, and then after I got out in 2018, I came on board with Northeastern and just been focusing on the military audience. So I help military affiliated students get closer to their goals through the power of education. So I've been with the university for 7 years now.
Yeah, great. So let's talk today about remote learning. And so first, let's talk a little bit about your experience with remote learning or kind of why you're a good person to talk to you about this.
Sure. So my husband was stationed in Coast Guard Alameda at the time in California, and that was in 2020, kind of in the start of COVID.
Mm,
I had decided to pursue my doctorate of education at that time with Northeastern. And what started out as like, oh my gosh, how is this going to work with remote learning? It was awesome, honestly, to tell you the truth. I got to study at home. Everything was online on Canvas is what we had used. And the remote and hybrid learning space really underwent a huge shift in what once used to become like supplementary tools. It was being fully integrated in strategic modalities within higher education. So Canvas was what we had used. And it was really nice, honestly. Just it was a different experience than going to school in person. Before COVID, I did a graduate certificate in digital media and management and was an in-person student at Northeastern. Obviously, I was fighting traffic because it was the schools in Boston, so I would have to spend an hour and a half just to get there and then
right.
almost be out if I didn't get my coffee and then have to sit through a lecture for an hour and a half, which was awesome, just a different experience, and maybe would have been nicer if I didn't have to sit through that traffic. So online learning was awesome, right? Because I did not have to spend that time traveling to the university. It felt like the university came directly to me in my living room, in my home, and it was truly an awesome experience.
That's great. Well, and I mean, there's so many advantages to working remote, for instance, right? Like, I mean, my company, we are all fully remote and it lets us live in places that are not super expensive urban centers, right?
Mhm.
But I'm curious, what are the advantages of remote learning and how do you see remote learning being relevant in today's world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I mean, ever since COVID, we've all had to undergo this shift, whether we were prepared for it, ready for it, mentally, spiritually, physically. It's here. And I think remote work and learning is here to stay. We've seen that if remote learning is done right, the key factor isn't really the format, it's the
Hmm.
quality of the instruction and the support. So, I don't know. I think that remote learning has definitely changed the game. You can now be anywhere in the world. You can spend that time that you would have been spending traveling, like I've said, and you can spend that extra time reading an extra chapter in your textbook or whatever learning material. You can spend that hour talking and collaborating with a fellow classmate about maybe his or her project and maybe about what your project should be. I know my dissertation has changed or did change two or three times before I finally nailed it. And it wasn't solely my own decision making coming to that realization. It was speaking with faculty, it was speaking with my fellow classmates to really hone in on those decisions. So it was really that extra time that I had to give to more connecting with students. And I think with
Mhm.
remote learning, people are under this misconception that you don't get to connect as much. It
Mhm.
certainly can be if you're not going above and beyond to connect with your fellow classmates, but the
Right.
opportunity is there, the platform is there. You just have to use it and take advantage of it.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next kind of like talking point was what are the common misconceptions about remote learning? I feel like there's a lot that people kind of assume, like you said, maybe assuming that they're not going to connect with their classmates or assuming that that's going to be lower quality, right? What are some of those misconceptions and what do you have to say about them?
Yeah, definitely. I hear all of the time in the field as I speak with students about the opportunity of remote learning. They always ask me about the quality. And I always can say it's the same faculty members. So it's the same faculty members that are teaching on ground classes as they are in person. It's the same curriculum. It is the same academic rigor, if you will. And it's the same degree at the end of the day. So that's usually the biggest misconception that I see is the quality. And then the other one is the connection piece. And the platform is usually universities use Canvas or Blackboard. So you can see who's all registered in the class and you can email them, you can call them, you can FaceTime, you can Teams, you can, I mean, the list is endless. So you can connect with them just as you would any other person. See other misconceptions, cost sometimes. Different universities and programs within the universities will have different cost structures. So that's
Mm.
definitely something you want to keep in mind too.
Like,
Not
so
really a
the misconception is that remote learning is cheaper than it really is, or the misconception is that it's
right
more expensive than it really is?
cheaper. So every program is it costs a different tuition bill, if you will. So it's not to say that it's cheaper because it's online. There's different programs out there that
Like you
just
said, it's the
cost it.
same professors, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, how has this shifted since COVID also? Like, I assume that remote learning is probably a lot more common than it was before COVID, but has it changed like the cost or has it changed the quality of the delivery if people have gotten more used to it? What are the ways that it's changed?
Yeah, so a lot of people who were not comfortable with remote learning, I think have now become comfortable. This is now part of our lives, and they're seeing that they can do more in less time, more efficient. So now I see this trend of everyone taking light to it. And I think remote learners sometimes often struggle at first with time management, self-discipline, and feelings of isolation, like we've talked about with the connection points. I know these are real challenges, especially for adult learners who are juggling, their careers and families. So I think time management is a huge piece.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I also think people are just more used to the idea of taking Zoom seriously, for lack of a better word, right? Like actually like doing real things over the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that
No,
does bring
yeah.
up like a good thing, and I think you mentioned time, right? But I mean, what are the challenges that students face in with remote learning, or what are the main things that people need to be aware of and account for? And you mentioned time, so how is managing time around remote learning any different than classroom learning?
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically the same. The only difference is like you're obviously connecting online. So you need to make sure that you have Wi-Fi access. You need to make sure that you are connecting, they call it discussion board posts. So that is equivalent to your participation in the class. So if the professor, for instance, is not seeing you raise your hand or collaborate and contribute to the class in person, then your participation grade will be lowered, right? So
Mm,
online, that is on the discussion board. You need to be active on the discussion board. So usually At Northeastern, when I was a student there, we had to do an initial post by Wednesday, and then you had until Sunday to respond to two people. And that was part of your participation grade for that given quarter in class.
The
Yeah,
same
so some
idea,
people
but
just,
looks a little different, right?
hmm
Well, and I think there is something else to be said about the fact that for some people, it's a lot easier to do it live. Like if you're in class and you're sitting there anyway, responding to the teacher is not that big of a deal. But if you have to remember it almost as like a homework assignment for later, maybe it's harder to do it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends on the classes too. So I've taken some remote courses where they are asynchronous in that it's exactly what we were talking about, where you have until Wednesday to do your initial post and then Sunday to do your replies. So you kind of forget the conversation in between Wednesday and Sunday. But there are some synchronous classes that you can take that many universities offer. And that one would look like a professor saying, okay, we're going to meet every Tuesday night virtually, and it'll be a place where I can host it virtually. You'll see the lecture live, and you'll be able to put in the chat any questions that you have, and then I'll get to the chat and we'll have an open discussion about it. And so that is very much like doing it live in person in the same classroom at the university.
Hmm. Yeah, so then I am curious, what are the other challenges that students face, right? Do you feel like motivation or engagement is an issue with online learning, and how do you guys tackle that?
Yeah, I think one
Or is it
thing that,
not, right? You can challenge me on these things, right?
yeah, I think one thing I personally was challenged with was the writing piece. So obviously working on a doctorate, there was a lot of writing in the dissertation. So when I got into the dissertation phase, if you were in person going to school, you could go to the library and you would have access to the librarians who are very smart. They know exactly where things are. They know even if you ask them for writing help, they can articulate it better, is what it seemed like. So I think that was one thing that I missed out on when I was in my dissertation writing is I didn't have that one-on-one ability to go into the library and have that authentic traditional experience.
Hmm.
However, because of COVID and with this whole shift of remote learning, you now can book appointments with them. So it comes down to just time management and not being able to like off of the cuff without an appointment walk into your local library and have these discussions. It's something that again, time management, you need to allot specific time and show up virtually for.
Hmm. Well, and I think, like you said, it kind of takes a little bit more planning and forethought, right?
Yeah, and that was definitely one thing. Like in my undergrad, I would just show up at the library and and be taken care of. I didn't have to make any appointments. And then with this whole shift with remote learning, there was now, time management skills were being challenged and in a good way because when you get into the work center, it's all about time management, managing your calendar, our basics, and it's just preparing you for later to come.
Yeah. Then my next question on that is basically like right now, I feel like what's been going on, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of this sort of added organization that's been needed is falling on the students. Do you feel like it's sort of the institution's responsibility to assist with this? And are there examples that you can think of as ways to help?
I think like as we learn, as we adapt, as we change and shift different modalities, I think, from a learner perspective, it's a dual responsibility. It's self-responsibility on yourself as a student. And then I know many universities that do accommodate the student and meet them exactly where they are. There's academic advisors that are always willing to help. I know my academic advisor was on speed dial. So anytime I said, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this in particular." And one of those was formatting to become published. That was something I really struggled with because there were so many different rules and it's your first time writing it. So that's where my academic advisor was helping and calling out all of these these support systems, people that could help, both attached to the university, but also external, and how I go about getting the help that I need. So I think as we learn, as we shift, as we adapt, I think it's important to one, from the student, advocate for yourself, get a hold of people. If you don't know who to go to, just raise your hand and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this, and reaching out for help. And nine times out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, you will get the help that you need.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I mean, I think that there's also things that are kind of like maybe up to the individual professor, but that could probably be helpful, like building a calendar for people or things like that. And I imagine we'll see more of it as we kind of all get more used to this whole remote learning landscape.
Yeah, totally. Like some fellow students had used like Google Docs to centralize everyone's work if we were working on a group project, and others wanted to use other things. So, I mean, we learned together, and it's also really cool coming together and seeing the different approaches that the students take, because you learn from students. You don't just learn from the faculty members, you're also learning from your fellow students. Like, I didn't even know that Airtables was a thing until recently. So I thought that was pretty cool. You just learn. You learn as you go, and you learn from others.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I also think that, there are a lot of benefits, right? And I think we talked a little bit about flexibility, being able to balance work and school, not having to commute. What are some other benefits that maybe are not as obvious or that people haven't thought about with remote learning?
I think the flexibility honestly was huge for me. So 2020 and the start of all of this COVID, I worked for the university, 8:30 to 5, and I was going to school 5:01 till 12 midnight some nights, and then also had my first child. So throughout all of that, there was an immense amount of flexibility on when I could study, when I would read my readings for the week, when I would write my papers. If I had a bad night, meaning like the newborn was not sleeping and was fussy and I had to stay up with him all night, then in the morning hours, I could decide I'm going to read my materials before my newborn wakes up, and then I'll get to the discussion post on Wednesday and it'll be enough time.
Hmm.
So the flexibility for sure, I think, is the biggest advantage, and all the time that you save, right? Because I can't emphasize the traveling piece. So much time when I lived in just a major city was given to just the traveling to get to a place. So
Hmm.
now I have that time back where I'm allotting to anything that I want. So it's an opportunity to be more efficient, but you're learning that time management piece, right? So managing your calendar better. One thing that I'm also learning in remote learning and everything is like your bookings link, right? For, fellow students, like booking times with you to connect on a group project or anything. Like there are so many different things to keep in mind, like buffer times, right, between meetings, and to give yourself extra 10 minutes. So things that aren't really well known in the in-person world,
They're not
like
obvious, yeah.
right, right. Now it's a whole new language.
Hmm. Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And not only is it a whole new language, but I think it is a different type of learning and one that you kind of have to take more responsibility yourself over, right? Like nobody's going to hold your hand and make you look at your computer. So
Mhm.
I'm curious, what are the things, what's the advice that you have for people that are going into a remote learning or online learning situation that, you would advise them like to do essentially?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would recommend is to get a hold of your syllabus and your
Hmm.
schedule and look at all of the assignments that are due, and then put that into your calendar immediately. Put reminders on it. if you're going out of town in any part of the class and things are due, I would suggest either getting a hold of your professor if you think that you need extra time and making sure the professor knows that well ahead of time that you're going to need extra time. Don't do it the day of. Or if you know you're going out of town July weekend and here we are in June, work on that project that's due that weekend in July now. That way you can turn it in early. So those two
It's
are
like
the
more proactive, be proactive and actually plan
yes.
ahead, I feel like.
Yes, absolutely. And group projects are always interesting. So if you see any group projects that are coming up, make sure you're delegating and splitting up the work as quickly as possible, like on the first time that you're meeting, and have, this person is doing X, Y, and Z, this person is doing this, and making sure that everyone is on the same page and having those due dates. So if the overall project is due in July, then make sure in June you're meeting at least once a week and hitting those little deadlines within your group. That way, and give yourself, that buffer room, like maybe a week worth of proofreading and grammar, right? So give yourself that time, start early, not later, not the day of, not the night before. So again, it goes into that time management and being proactive for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Well, great. And then I think my last question for you today is just how do you see remote learning evolving in the future? What does the future hold for this?
Well, like AI is a huge topic right now, just not in higher education. It's everywhere.
Mm.
So honestly, I see more of that. If I would be a guessing woman, I would see more AI powered feedback, virtual reality simulations, and personalized learning paths that maybe are based on student behavior and goals. I'm really excited about the future. Just, AI can be scary or it can be like, wow, this is really innovative and this is how we really progress into our future. So it would be, I know that virtual reality has been around for a long while, but how we actually apply that in the classroom setting might be interesting and I think would be very futuristic and definitely something that we could do if we're not already doing it. As a recruiter for a university, we did have at one time virtual reality headsets that we would bring on to different conferences. And if someone was interested in seeing our Charlotte campus or our Arlington campus, we had virtual tours set up on that virtual reality that they could go in and they could see and actually experience the campus. And they're nowhere near that campus, right? So I feel like more of that, if it's not already implemented, which I know in some classes it is, I see more of that coming to fruition in our higher education space.
Yeah, that's great. Well, any parting thoughts here as we wrap up this conversation?
No, I think we've covered it, Tyler. I think if anyone's interested in remote learning, don't be afraid of it, embrace it. It's been a great opportunity for me in my life, being a military spouse, moving every 2 years, having little ones. So the flexibility is there. And, remote learning has really opened up the gates for anyone with a willingness to learn, regardless of wherever you're at, as long as you have Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that's always important. Wi-Fi. Great. Well, thanks so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for the changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Casey from Northeastern. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT and CLT courses at achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.